Need a plan for this course. As we've seen, it has those sort of that moment that's quieter in the middle. You've got a big headwind. You need a good plan. And we're going to now put these two race plans to test.
The Grand Challenge Cup since 1839, the first event for Henley Royal Regatta, the Open Men's 8. It's China and Australia.
Attention. Go.
They're always going to be looking to try and get that early lead if they can. Very controlled first stroke from Australia, setting the crew up a little quicker out, but a long and powerful way of setting up that start now from Australia and building off that. So interesting kind of different techniques coming out the start there. Now that rate is high, and I think Australia is showing more power already coming out of the island.
Yeah, contrasting techniques. Both of these crews will be peak fitness, approaching the crescendo of the World Championships. As you call it, it's really neck and neck. Looks like the Australians may have had a bit of a lead, but as our cat moves up alongside, we'll be able to tell a bit more precisely what's happening at this early stage. Australians had a real flyer, though, didn't they, Kat?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The actual first stroke was a lot slower, but it was powerful, it was long, it got that shell moving, and then they had that platform to build off. But now, again, it's a more solid rhythm for me. It's firmer. They're marking the start of the stroke, the end of the stroke. It's already a formidable rhythm.
Well, Kath Bishop said at the start, you need a plan for this race. Looks to me like the Australians' plan was to get off quick and stay high for longer than people might expect. And if you do that, then you've got a chance of opening up a lead and maybe disappearing out of the vision of the athletes in the Chinese boat. And that's what they're trying to do now. They're keeping it higher, longer. It's very expensive if it doesn't pay off, and we'll see how that unfolds.
So that's the critical piece, isn't it? If you can't break clear and you put that much from your tank out already, then that can be difficult. But we can see there that the Chinese have got some real steering issues in their boat, and that will not be helping. Putting the rudder on an 8 is just putting the brake on. So that's, again, in a Cox crew, you've got to be on it to try and make sure you are helping your crew to go as fast as possible, as direct as possible. But, it's going to be challenging for these Coxes who aren't used to the course. And, of course, it's their first race, so they're having to learn on a Saturday, whereas lots of other crews have kind of done their learning a few days ago. This is straight into the fire.
Absolutely right. So they've passed the barrier, which is our first major marker, 637 meters into the course. The Chinese, as you say, with that 19-meter long shell of an 8, that's a big, long boat, and a tiny rudder in the stern to steer it, so it can sway around quite a lot. You need to be right on top of the steering, and the Cox WLU in the Cox's suite of the Chinese crew can't see much in front of them, but what they can see is that the Australians have got the edge at this point. And you said expensive to steer too much in an 8 here. It looks like the Australians have got a straighter line. You can see how strong the wind is, though, from the flags down the side of the course. It's really tricky. We've seen lots of crews with real experience still struggling here.
It is really difficult, particularly the Cox's boats, but of course the Cox's, they've got the same challenge. As I walk to the commentary box, it is really strong, gusty headwind, challenging conditions, challenging water, very poppily, plus you have the extra swirl that you get at Henley. So testing the watermanship skills of these crews. But there's a lot of experience in, perhaps in the Australia crew, we see that greater experience starting to pay off for them. We know that Angus Widdicombe and Simon Keenan, they were in the men's 8, they came 6th in Tokyo, and want to be part of a project that's rebuilding the Australian 8 to get back into the medals at World Champs level.
Yeah, so they were second at the World Cup 2 race in Poznan behind the Germans, which is a good marker for them. Not everybody is there at the World Cup races. They will be at the World Championships, but the Australians, well, this has been a good experiment for them to get out so fast and take the race to the Chinese. You can see now that they're in a more sustainable rhythm, I would say, here. The Chinese still look to be attacking quite hard, but the Australians look to have found something that could be more sustainable now.
Yeah, there's a sharpness for me to the Australian crew. The blades are covered that bit quicker, they're gripping quicker, so they're getting the work on a little quicker. And that, each stroke moves you further and further away. And now that's a comfortable position to be in. You've got clear water, stroke can watch what's happening in the Chinese crew. And now, they start to get into different races in their heads. Australia are pushing away, it feels comfortable, you relax. And then for the Chinese crew, you lose a sense of where the Australians are. The doubts come into your head, you think, what can we do now? And there's a lot of pressure for that Chinese Cox to help the crew settle, try and continue to build the rhythm. But it's just, you can see it's a little less stable in the Chinese crew. They've got some rocking moments that happen here and there, whereas it looks you know, from that first stroke that was a longer stroke, a slower stroke, but a powerful stroke that set them up, the Australian crew have had that more stable base to work on.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, Australians are just coping better with the conditions. The Chinese are struggling a little bit with the bounce, the boat rolling a bit, and also a little bit with the steering. It's a 22-meter wide track, and you don't have the buoys that you would have in a standard 2,000-meter course that tell you when you're a little bit off course. So you've got to read it much more cleverly from the wider course. And the Chinese, I think they're travelling further than they need to in this race. The Australians dead straight, and I think you called it well as well. The sharpness of the blade work here in the Australian 8 as we see it from behind. You've got a non-traditional rig here, so you've got stroke and bow on the same side and two together in the middle of the boat. In the Chinese boat, the traditional alternate stroke side, bow side oars, one each side as you go through the boat.
So we've got more steering problems for the Chinese, and that's just going to cost them pace. And it also disrupts the rhythm. It's going to disrupt the balance a little bit. And the Australians, of course, are going to be thinking about, you know, the Germans. That's who they want to be racing. They were second to them in Poznan, and they need to use Henley as a way of getting them up to the level to be able to challenge the Germans. And, you know, at the moment, the Chinese are just struggling to create a stable base for themselves. And,
you know, when you're in the 8, you can see from the previous shot how much it's moving around. When you're in an 8 that's being steered like that, here it goes again. I wonder if they've actually got a problem with their rudder. You can see an almost S-bend. They're like trying to write a Chinese character in this Henley River track. It's probably a bit of a mistake to be doing that. Look at the angle that they're coming at there. I think umpire John Hedger is going to be watching quite carefully. Doesn't want to see anybody impeding each other, but I think the gap now is sufficient. The Chinese are going, well, they've added to the 2,112 metres they needed to row by perhaps another 10 or 20 metres just with that last of the manoeuvre we saw there. Could be that the Cox has got a problem. Maybe there's a bit of weed that's been caught in the rudder that's making it harder, but it's given the Australians the chance to have, well, command of the race really from the first quarter.
Absolutely. I think, you know, for the Chinese, you know, they're used to being in buoyed lanes, and it feels different at Henley. They came up against a really formidable Australian men's 8 who are here to make it to the final.
Well, that's the Grand. The first semi-final of the Grand we'll see this afternoon. The Australian National 8 beating the Chinese national rowing team. They'll be pleased with that, this new project from Australia.